All right. Here. All righty. And then I'm going to, I guess, show my video. All right. Let's check in YouTube for chat things real quick. Perfect. All righty. Hopping back over here. All right. Well, it is January 8th, 2026, and we are here live in Austin, Texas for Austin PHP and broadcasting live over the internet via Merge PHP. Welcome to folks who are both here in person and are on the stream. I'm in a slightly different room than the actual meetup because, well, got to keep the doors open for folks physically coming in to show up at the meetup. So without further ado, thanks again for everyone tuning in online. This is the January edition of Merge PHP. New time, still online. Now there we go. Again, thanks to the assortment of user group organizers across the US who help make Merge PHP possible. We have a JetBrains license raffle, whether that is PHP Storm or one of any number of JetBrains IDEs. If you don't already have one, first one to get an email to Chris Spruck gets a license for 1 year. We thank JetBrains for their support of Merge PHP and the PHP community. So if you haven't heard, PHP 8.5 is out. We have a number of valid PHP versions that are currently still getting security updates direct from the source. If you are on an older one, please switch to a newer one. If your Linux distribution is backporting patches, then fair enough, but you really want to be on a currently supported version plus security fixes. I'll be right back. I have to let somebody else in.
Yes, there is. Awesome. Same place, right? How you doing?
All right. All the way down on the right.
Right, perfect. Thank you.
And I'm back. So let's get to the next slide here. There are a number of events in the PHP community over the course of the next several months, including Symphony Online coming up here in January. We have a Drupal Camp, PHP Conference, DrupalCon, etc. And then if you want to show up at an in-person event in the States, you've got MidCamp in Chicago in mid-May. PHP Tech just about a week later, also in Chicago. And you can head up to Montreal in Canada for Symphony Day in early June. And then there's Drupal Camp Colorado in August in Denver. So a variety of events, and I'm sure more will be announced as time goes on. We are on various socials. Sometimes we'll even post on them. You can find us on the Fediverse. You're probably watching this via YouTube. YouTube is absolutely the best place at the moment to keep track of us. There is also the PHPC chat channel for Merge PHP. If you're not already in that Discord, then you should show up there. So next month, We have domain-driven PHP by Chris Miller. Once this meetup is complete, if you go to mergephp.com, you can see the description of this talk there, rather than having to quickly read the entire multi-paragraph description here. So looking forward to that in February. If you have a talk idea, mention us on socials or fill out the form listed on your screen here. So for tonight, 1 second. And now I'm going to turn it over to Hunter Skrasik to talk about mastering agentic development with MCP on PHP stuff. And I'll drop my video.
All right. Good evening, everybody. I am hoping that everybody can hear me. I can kind of see a little bit of the chat and restream. So if you can, let me know. Okay. Audio and video are good. Thank you, Tim. Now I can actually get back to my meeting notes. Where are you? Mouse, come back to me. There you are. My name is Hunter Skrasik. I'm currently a software architect for a company here in Austin called Modernized Home Services, and I've been working with software and PHP since about 2006 when I started teaching myself, and then obviously my career kind of started a little bit later when I was not starting high school back then. I also happen to be one of the organizers of Longhorn PHP alongside Ian and many others. We'll hopefully have some updates on Longhorn in the future, but I'll save that for Ian. But I want y'all to join me tonight as we dive into a topic that, I don't know, it's probably a little bit of a niche topic, actually. I don't really think anybody's talking about AI or MCP much these days, but hopefully all will find this interesting and entertaining. So, what is today's mission? We are going to build an MCP server that gives AI assistants real-time PHP knowledge. Or more specifically, we're going to build a PHP.NET documentation MCP server. So your AI assistant has the full context of the PHP language and stops hallucinating function signatures and language features. A few months ago, it threw up some amazing PHP code that was completely nonsense. It was not, none of the syntax was supported. It had a bunch of features from other languages that would be nice if we could have them, but we're not quite there yet. This server, if it had existed back then, would have been able to help it get things a little bit more right, though. Why does this matter, though? Well, AI assistants are only as good as the context that they have access to. And without real-time documentation, even the best models can hallucinate APIs that just don't exist, or depending on what they were trained on, might just be missing modern best practices for PHP. PHP has gone through a lot of change over the years, but there's still a lot of resources that show off like what PHP 5.4 looked like. And we're now in 8.5, and it's a whole completely different ballgame, nicer, better ways to write code that's more efficient. And we're going to fix that. For this next slide, I apologize in advance for the cursed and or blurst image, but I wanted to go with the TRON theme, and this is what my friend photoshopped for me. So here's me as the MCP from the original TRON. Handsome devil, isn't he? But this master control program or model context protocol service, unlike the TRON original, is actually here to help. And for the record, yes, that is the joke that we're committing to for this entire talk. So I apologize in advance. And well, I apologize for sticking to the joke. I'm not that sorry that all of you had to see this cursed Photoshop with me. But hopefully it's not too bad. All right, we'll move away from it. So what is MCP? Model Context Protocol. We're not going to go super deep into what MCP is. There was already one of those talks at Merge PHP a couple of months ago. I highly recommend checking out the recording on YouTube. Today we're going to go a little bit of a surface level and then look more at actually building a server using PHP. But it's an open standard by Anthropic for connecting AI models to external tools and data sources. You could kind of consider it the USB-C of AI integrations. One protocol, MIDI connections. Before MCP was introduced by Anthropic, every single AI tool had to be basically a custom integration to the AI agent that you were using, whether it was ChatGPT, Cursor, Claude, Claude Code, Hero, Windsurf, and the 17,000 others that I'm probably forgetting or not aware of. MCP just kind of eases all that pain points aside, standardizes how the AI assistants will actually talk to the external systems. It's pretty much the write once, connect everywhere of the AI agentic world. MCP architecture is kind of made up of three main pieces. You've got your host, your clients, and servers. The focus today is going to be building an MCP server, but just want to touch on a few of these topics just to make sure we're on the same page as we move along. So, first entity is host. AI applications that need external content. I won't redo the giant list again, but Claude Desktop or Code, Hero, VS Code, whatever, any AI-powered app that wants to use tools or access data is a host in this context. This is the AI agent you're interacting with and prompting for explanations or solutions, or hey, maybe you're getting both out of your session with the agent. Then there's clients. The client is basically like the little protocol connector between the host and your actual MCP server. It's sitting there, it's managing and handling connections to one or potentially multiple MCP servers. There's not technically a limit to how many you can connect to one agent at once. Just be aware that if you connect too many, then you start basically cannibalizing the context space. You need to be able to get the agent to do what you want. So you gotta, for now, until things improve, we gotta be a little bit careful with how many MCP servers you connect to the agent. A good example is the GitHub MCP server actually allows you to filter some of the features down because it exposes the entirety of the GitHub ecosystem to the AI agent, and that's a lot. So, but there's two main transport mechanisms when you're working with or connecting to an MCP server. The first one is standard I/O. Standard input/output streams for directly communicating with the local process on the machine that you're running on and working with the agent on. That's what we're going to be working with tonight. There's also streamable HTTP, which uses HTTP post because everything nowadays is HTTP, no matter what you do, or I mean, I guess TCP, whatever. But that HTTP post is what enables the client to server messaging. And there's also the support for being able to use server sent events so you can get more like live streaming real-time capabilities out of the tools and your communications with your agent. And then finally, servers, your tools and resources. This is what we're going to be building today. It's kind of already built, but what we're going to be building today. And these servers expose the capabilities that the AI can discover and use, whether it's something locally available, so like a standard I/O server running on your machine, or okay, it's back. Whatever that was. Locally available host machine or remote server providing functionality. A good example of a remote server that I know I use frequently in my day-to-day job is the one provided by Atlassian, which allows me to just have the agent pull in Jira ticket details and work with that instead of having to copy and paste manually. And very useful. I highly recommend it if you're a Jira shop. And then MCP servers are made up of 3 primitive types: tools, resources, and prompts. Tools are pretty much just functions that the AI can call. And that's where we're going to be focusing our efforts today. They're, any action that you can dream of that you want to expose to the agent is going to be implemented as a tool. And that's ranging from working with files, API calls, database queries, you name it. Then there's resources. Resources are more data that the AI can read. There's 2 different types of resources available: static or dynamic context. And the way you could think about it is static resources, well, I mean, kind of self-explanatory. It's static, it is what it is. Be it, I don't know, maybe some text and an explanation. Maybe it's just a resource that's telling the agent, hey, this user that's authenticated has these permissions to this platform. Or you can have a dynamic one, and that's could come into play more if you just want to give the agent a, like, hey, this logged in user is this person, Hunter Skrasik, with this company, blah, 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 or whatever has to do with your application. Key things to keep in mind with resources are that they are read-only access. And then finally, there's prompts, or really these are just kind of like reusable templates. As a lot of y'all probably are aware, interacting with AI agents involves either you prompting them, or if you're building a tool that's powered by AI, you're writing a system prompt, which is then combined with the user prompt and all that fun jazz. You can actually have the MCP server share out prompts that the agent, whatever agent is connecting to it, can use in tandem with the tools and resources and the data that it pulls to make sure that the output is what you're expecting. You don't want your tool to potentially give information that the model then just hallucinates a bunch of BS about, because that's not helpful. But if you have a prompt, the agent can figure out, okay, use the prompt with the tool, merge together, guaranteed consistent output every time. But they're really useful for complex workflows. System prompts, one or few shot examples, and more. Let's talk about how a request flows. And it's pretty much, AI agent going to be talking to the client, which is reaching out to the server, getting the response, banging it back. Just asking a question, getting the data from the tool, using that to synthesize the answer to whatever your query was. Relatively simple. Let's write some code, though, or we'll look at some code that's already been written. We'll do some live demo, but I wanted to shy away from live coding this evening because one of them is a little bit less fraught with peril and disaster than the other. And I'll knock on whatever this material is made out of and hope that doesn't jinx me. But let's get our hands dirty with the official PHP MCP SDK, which in my notes looks like a alphabet soup of uppercase letters. So project setup, fairly straightforward. Composer require model context protocol / PHP SDK. This is the official SDK for building MCP servers in PHP. We'll talk a little bit more about how this kind of came to be, but key thing to know is that this was basically a collaborative effort between the PHP Foundation and one of Symfony's AI initiative groups that got us to where they are today. There's other ways that you can write MCP servers. For example, if you're a Laravel shop, Laravel has their own MCP server package, which doesn't currently use this. That doesn't mean that can't change in the future, but this didn't exist before they made theirs, so what are you gonna do? Anatomy of an MCP server. Pretty straightforward. Same pattern is set up the server, tell it what you can do, and then handle the incoming request. So let's live build this PHP.NET documentation server. It was definitely built live just a few weeks ago, before 2026 started, so that I could make sure my idea would actually work. And it did, because I'm here talking to y'all. Or otherwise, we'd be talking about something else. But there were some gotchas, and we'll get into that later. But this is it. This is an MCP server written in PHP. Of course, this is a very, pared down, like bare bones example, but build out the server, provide some like basic details so that the agent knows what the server is and some version. We'll get into that set discovery bit in a bit, and then, build. Fluent builder pattern gives you the server, and then you tell it run, and you pass it any of the transports that are available, standard IO, HTTP. Technically, you could support both, but you're usually going to do one or the other. But this is all it takes, and this gives you a working server. But let's keep going. I'll just leave that joke about the talk ending right here out, because So we're going to build live 2 tools, one of which is a PHP doc search, and the other one is a PHP composer search. The goal is to give an AI assistant direct access to PHP's official documentation and the ability to find existing composer packages to help you with whatever your project is and what you're working on. Or maybe it's there to help maintain or refactor a legacy code base to migrate off of homegrown in-house solutions that are definitely tested and works well. Whatever hypothetical works for you. So this is, technically speaking, this is the tool for a PHP doc search. Font might be a little bit small. Apologize for that. The actual functionality, what's doing the work is this, line right here, search engine search. We'll look at what that is actually doing in a bit. But that discovery line that you saw a second ago, pointing to source directory, is paired with PHP's fancy semi-new annotations, and it uses that to determine what tools are available and exposes them to the server. You don't have to do this giant block like I did. I have a tendency to be more descriptive than letting some of them like auto magic work, even though you're about to literally see what that looks like in a second. But without any arguments to MCP tool annotation, it will auto-magically figure out the tool name, basically just reusing the function name that you've annotated. It'll use the documentation from the PHP doc to give you a description, and that's really the most you need to do. I went ahead and got a little bit fancier with it. These annotations just kind of are part of the MCP protocol. They help give more context to how the tool works or what the tool's capable of doing. In this case, I'm giving it a title, Search for PHP Documentation. Maybe not the best title, but this only comes up when you're actually working with the agent and it's showing you, I'm using this tool to do X. Instead of it just showing PHP underscore docs underscore search, something all of us programmers are probably very familiar with, might as well make it a little bit nicer looking. Read-only hint, read-only. Open world hint, a little bit weirder. Had to go digging into the model context protocols like specifications, but open world hint is basically indicating to the agent that this tool provided by the server is reaching out to or working with external entities. It probably doesn't make sense that I have this as true for how I wound up actually implementing this tool, but we'll get to that gotcha in a few minutes. But like I said, swing on back to, we got that set discovery. All it really takes is the annotation. Don't need any of the other attributes, but being descriptive never hurts and helps other humans, for as long as that's still the case, that are looking at the code to know what it's doing and what's happening. And let's take a little peek under the hood because, probably interested, how is this actually working? This will start to spoil a little bit of the gotcha that I ran into when I went to go build this. And I've trimmed some of this down, but yep, that's a SQL query. More specifically, it's running against a SQLite database. A lot of other stuff has been trimmed down, get the results, and then I'm mapping each of those rows into a search result object that then gets returned by the tool, gets JSON serialized, and the agent uses that data. Bish bash bosh, it knows how to use PHP correctly. Okay, nope, that is exactly how that was supposed to print. Here's the other tool that I showed off. And this one, I actually wrote PHP doc block on it. It's back, okay. This flickering thing happens with extended monitors at home from time to time, and I thought it was just my dock, but now I'm thinking it's just Macs. Anyway, that's a different talk topic. We have this tool to search for composer packages, and it's very simple. It's just guzzle. I can try. Okay, that's not a helpful presentation tool. I don't need my notes zoomed in. I want the real thing zoomed in. I am not quickly seeing it, but maybe. No, this is IA presenter.
Alternative would be if you've got the code listed somewhere, then I can throw it in the chat.
Yep, we'll go for that. Apologies that the text wound up being a little bit smaller than I intended. I guess this is the downside of having big monitors at home and not testing for smaller ones. I'll have to remember that for the next time I do this or a variation of it. But Ian will share a link soon when it actually exists for him to share. But all this code is going to be pushed up to my GitHub right after I finish this talk because I didn't get a chance to do that before I drove out here. But this tool's straightforward. It's just using the Guzzle client to run a GET request against packages.org and just returns those results raw right to the agent. Quick and dirty, but it works for our purposes. Why didn't I use any of the composer packages that exist on Packagist that give you an API for finding composer packages on Packagist? Yeah, I think I got that train going correctly. Good question. I just threw this together and completely forgot to look for any that existed till after I got it working. And maybe a little bit thinking like, I want to try and keep this low on dependencies, but with a lot of the ideas I have for expanding this tool, probably want to just use whatever Spaxy or any of the other existing packages are. Funnily enough, we could actually use an AI agent when we do a live demo to ask it to find the composer packages. We're talking to packet. Okay, I'm not going to do that again. So cool, we built all this, but how do you test this? Especially since we've gone ahead and used the standard I/O transport for MCP servers. You could technically, directly manipulate and, echo the JSON RPC instructions into the standard I/O to get the response out, but that sounds miserable to do. But thankfully, they've already provided a handy-dandy inspector tool that you can run with NPX that allows you to connect and debug and inspect any MCP server that you give it access to, standard I/O, HTTP, streaming HTTP, and if you're going for those HTTP routes and you've got authenticated servers, it supports being able to do the OAuth2 authentication or whatever you're flavor of server is using for that. How does that look? Like this. You can see transport type standard command PHP, give it the arguments, my server.php. See it's connected. You can see the name and the version that we defined earlier. You can actually see the search for composer packages available on packages.org was pulled from the PHP doc. And this one has no description because I didn't give it one. Oops. But you can actually use the tools and run them from the inspector and see the communication back and forth between this, like AI host, if we're looking at the architecture model, talking to the server and be able to see, the different calls that are happening over JSON RPC under the hood. And even, the server can give notifications. If you look up at the top, really the only things that we have on this server for tonight are tools. You can see resources and prompts. And there's ping, which is, ping, pong, it's working. Sampling and elicitations and roots and off. Those are more advanced topics. Okay. While the TV comes back. Those are more advanced topics, but basically MCP servers can actually push out a request to the AI agent that's connected to it to get information to update the session state of the server. For our use case, not needed. But if you're building an MCP server that's, say wrapping your company's API or service to expose it to an agent, those will come in handy if you want to be able to kind of get two-way communication between the MCP server and what it's providing the user and the AI agent or host in this case. How do we use this thing? Well, generally speaking, your mcp.json file will look like this unless you're Atlassian's RoboDev CLI, in which case they are using their own format for reasons I could not explain, but definitely not annoying to work around when we started using it at work. But straightforward, kind of same that you saw in the inspector just a second ago, command PHP, arg server.php. You have the ability to pass in env arguments. We want this to be enabled, so it's disabled, but you can turn these on and off. And then you can go ahead and auto-approve tools from an MCP server. If you already know they're going to be safe to use, just be careful. You don't want to auto-approve the one that goes sudo rm-rf / -- no preserve root. Or maybe you do. I don't know. If you like to live dangerously, then so be it. But this is all it takes to get pretty much 99% of your AI agent or agentic tools or IDEs to be able to connect to the server. Demo time. Let's see this in action. And that I will be able to actually fix the font so that hopefully everybody can see. Famous last words. Where'd you go, Kiro? I figured it was working on. Yeah, I figured the stream was all good, but we'll make it work. And okay, maybe a bit extreme. And then of course it went out, so I can't actually see it. Hold on, buffering. Okay, I gave it one more little tap on the zoom in. Hopefully everybody at home can see. I am using Kiro, one of AWS's products, and this is actually running within the project for the MCP server that I built for this talk. You can see I've got a few other MCP servers. I'm not going to click that pencil because it'll just reveal my Kagi API key. Too big? Oh, I thought I was being fancy when I did a share of a window and tisk, shouldn't have done that. Entire screen, that one. Boom. All right. hopefully we're good to go. I'll wait and see if Ian gives me a thumbs up. Sweet. And back to the fun. So MCP servers here. We can even expand it and see the two different tools. We can actually individually disable the tools, but shouldn't be something that we need to do. But let's give this thing a try. I've got a pre-canned one that I'll go first, and then I'll use the example that I brought up while we were here tonight. But, you know, I'm storing the documentation information in a SQLite database, and, you know, maybe just for funsies, I don't want to use an auto-incrementing ID. That's so old school. I want to use UUIDs to identify each document. But man, I don't know if there's a PHP package that gives you UUID support. So let's go ahead and see if the agent can take a look. Let's see. Like to index the documentation with UUIDs. Are there any composer packages available to provide that functionality? Well, functional. Thankfully, it will be fine. Thank you, whatever. Waiting on it's okay. So I maybe zoomed in a little bit too much, so the UI is jacked, but it's asking if I want to actually run the tool. Boop, boop. There you are. Well, we'll see how this goes. But UUID functional is not necessarily the query that I wanted it to run, but hey, it's AI. It's going to do things on its own from time to time. But you can see it's running. And oh, look, we got results from the tool. Got a few of them. And based on those results, we were able to get a synthesized answer from Hero, or really in this case, Claude Opus 4.5. And top recommendations. Ramsey UUID. Awesome. That's, you know, everybody probably is aware of that package by now. It's more or less the de facto standard for UUIDs in PHP. It's got a ton of downloads, and you've got support for version 1 through 7. It's well maintained, has great documentation. Round of applause for Ben Ramsey for providing that to us in the community. But there's other options available. Symfony has their own UUID package, and as it's identifying, may already be a dependency in my project because of some of the other Symfony tools that I'm using for this. There's a polyfill UUID if you don't really need an object-oriented, but just want, you know, like PHP functional functions to generate UUIDs. And it's actually kind of funny. When I was testing this, it gave the same bit of like what I recommend you should do. But the first time around, it recommended Ramsey's package. This time around, it's going, use the Symfony UID package. And part of it's because it's, you know, basically saying, hey, is that already there in your project? Because if it is, you don't need to bring in yet another UUID dependency. Just use the one you already have. And it even helpfully shows you how to use it. But then it goes, if you want the most feature-rich option, add Ramsey UUID. Boom. And then it even recommends for index and documentation, I'd recommend UUID v7, and that's because it's time-ordered, which gives you a little bit better database index performance instead of just using random v4 UUIDs. And then finally, it's trying to be helpful. You want me to check what's available in your project or help set up the UI integration? We're good now. Good for now, Claude, but let's go ahead and ask it another question. Actually, are there any PHP packages for searching packages for PHP packages? Yeah, yo dog, I heard you like pack. Yeah, I'm not gonna do that one again. And it's running some queries, and hey, look, these are exactly the same two that I found when I realized I should have probably looked instead of just building my own implementation first. First one being from Spachi. I really hope I'm saying that correctly. Spaci. Okay. I only have to say that word like once out loud a year, and usually at Longhorn, so it doesn't stick in my brain as well. And then KMP Labs also has a packages API that, I guess, according to the AI model, it was the original. It's a well-established client. Or you've got Spachi's clean, modern implementation. Both lets you search for packages, download stats, etc. And it even shows how we could go about implementing one of them. And then there's also a private packages API client for if you're working with private packages specifically. This is going to be if your work has internal composer packages that you don't really need to be out on the public, but are used between your different PHP applications internally. We use one. It's great. But hey, it's working. And finally, we'll show the docs. We'll just ask, is there a new operator for functional programming in PHP 8.5? And if we're lucky, it'll pick to use my documentation search. It is. I don't know. It just synthesized the pipe operator. You gave it away, AI. Up, and then it failed to call the tool. So then it, of course, like I said, I jinxed the live demo. So it fell back to using another one of the tools that I have, which is using Kagi for web searches or the fetch tool. Either one. We'll figure out why it didn't work in a second. But let me switch on back to my slides and my slide notes. Where are you, mouse? There you are. All right. So there were some lessons I learned while going about this, things that I wish I knew earlier. But like building the server and mostly the tools, that was the straightforward part. It was actually making it work with the idea that I wanted to put forward. That wound up being the tricky part and kind of wound up being a little bit more work than I initially signed up for, but doesn't matter. Lesson number one, PHP.NET does not have a documentation API. There is no endpoint that I could find that I could make a curl request to with a query and get documentation results back from it. Immediately wrecked what I thought was going to be a cakewalk, but I will admit it would have been a little bit lame if I just showed y'all two tools that were just, hey, look, I know how to use Guzzle, and boom, done, ready to go. So, need to work around that. Should something like that exist? I don't know. Honestly, like if it did exist, it would have made my life easier, but I'm not 100% sure if there's a huge need for it just in general. Like most of the time, you're probably just going to be, if you're not having an AI agent doing the work, then you're probably just looking at the PHP docs yourself, and it's already got a search there, powered by Google, yada, yada, yada. Also, the trend that I'm starting to see emerge is that now different sites, documentations are exposing an llm.txt like route, which basically just returns all of the documentation in one file in structured text, typically being markdown for the LLM to be able to quickly digest it and be able to use it. Maybe that's the approach we should have taken here. But we're going to talk about how to build an MCP server tonight and not how to generate a very, very long markdown file. So how does this actually work? Well, with a lot of elbow grease, or more specifically, a dive into the wonderful world of DOM crawling and CSS selectors. Woo! Everybody's favorite. So we'll take a look at the... Where's the rest of it? Okay, whatever. This is the indexer. This is how I actually built the index that's being used by the MCP server. Not a lot of super exciting stuff going on here. Just globbing a directory, getting the paths, and then running those paths through a function that's returns a generator and does the thing, makes the connection to the database, or the connection's already there, but prepares the query, which is just an insert statement, and then executes it. I feel like when I tried to fiddle with the font thing, I made it cut off what used to be all of it there. Cool. Here's the docs generator. It's now cutting off, of course, it's cutting off the cool parts of that one. But this is basically just doing a for each loop over all the paths from the HTML documentation, file get contents, initializing a new CSS crawl or DOM crawler from Symfony, which is why the AI agent started going, hey, you've already got Symfony stuff in your project, so you might already have that other thing. And we're basically just crawling every single page of PHP.NET's documentation and extracting the information using the DOM crawler and CSS selectors. Fun fact, did you know you can actually download the entirety of the PHP.NET documentation as either one astronomically large HTML file, if that's your flavor, or an archive of individual HTML files for each page of the documentation? I went that route because I didn't want to mess with the mega HTML file. So basically I just downloaded a local copy of the documentation, threw it in a build directory, and told this indexer, hey, pull all the HTML files from this directory, run my DOM crawler logic that I built, and build out the objects to be put into the database, so then when somebody is using the server, it can return results. Except for the fact that it bombed out when I tried to do a live demo, but that's live demos for you. Well, if Larry was here, he'd be happy to see that I also, to make it more fun for myself, challenged myself to use PHP 8.5 and a new feature that I've been looking forward to, the pipe operator. Finally making functional programming in PHP not a horrible mess of having to read backwards through space and time to understand the actual call stack of the nested functions. Was that a good idea to cram doing something new also into a talk? Who knows? But I did it anyway. So there's multiple functions like this, and you'll be able to see them all on GitHub once I push that code. But just running the HTML or the crawler with the HTML through a bunch of different extractor functions based depending on the type of data that I'm trying to pull from the page, and go from there. The keen eye among you might even go, hey, wait a second, there's something that looks a little rusty in that code snippet. Yep, I went full functional programming and just kind of ripped off Rust option monad, and brought it into PHP the best I could. So we get an option object that's got an unwrap or, and if you've used Rust or seen the code, you might be familiar with it, or if you saw the aftermath AAR from Cloudflare when they broke half the internet, they incorrectly did an unwrap and oops, everything broke. Gotcha number 1, or is this lesson number 2, or should it be gotcha number 2? I don't know really how I should have went with the numbering here. So whatever, but the conundrum I'm now in is, how do I productionalize this? Because now this MCP server requires downloading the entirety of the PHP documentation and then parsing that into a SQLite database. And all that seems a little bit heavy to me. My current idea was, let's just distribute this as a Docker image. Docker solves everything, right? Just use a multi-stage build, split building the index between the actual final product, which is just running the MCP server itself, and boom, that file might look something like this, but not actually, because this is a pseudo Docker file. I'm sure I'm doing things wrong all over the place, but general idea. Base, I need to install the SQLite thing, and then composer install. Don't want to bring in dev dependencies. Run my little bin command for building the index, and then jump over into the actual final stage of the build, which is just the same PHP 8.5 CLI with all the dependencies and everything pre-installed, copied over, and just by default, when you start or run the container, it runs the MCP server. This works. Nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of MCP servers that are provided by or via Docker, not by Docker, unless you consider it being by Docker, because they've now got this like MCP marketplace, even though they're free, of MCP Docker images that they highlight specially. GitHub is a good example of somebody who distributes their MCP server as a Docker image. But not 100% sure on this. Like I don't want to basically be like, all right, I have built the MCP server of your dreams that makes PHP development with an AI so smooth. You only need to download a multi-gigabyte Docker image, and then you're ready to go. That sounds awful. The SQLite database with just like all the pages that pulled into the documentation alone is like 56 megabytes. And then all the stuff to run PHP and the OS, not exactly a slim container image at the end of this. There's another approach that you could take if you've used Laravel Boost, which is that framework that ecosystems like MCP server they built to expose the Laravel framework documentation and ecosystem. That one works by, you install Laravel Boost as a composer package into the project you're working on, typically a dev dependency, and that registers a artisan command, and then you just configure the MCP server to execute PHP artisan. I think it's boost serve or boost run. You get the idea. But you could deploy it as like a binary file, but the Laravel approach obviously is only going to work for Laravel with artisan there. But PHP or composer packages can publish bin files. It's how we interact with past PHP unit, PHP stand, Psalm, yada, 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 Rector. So maybe that'd be the approach to go for just, PHP developers working on a PHP project using. That might be the best case. It still runs into the problem of a 56 megabyte SQLite database is needed to actually have the documentation available. So still not 100% in love with my options for distributing this, just with the approach that I wound up taking. Definitely open to any suggestions or ideas via GitHub when I publish the code, but we'll get to that here at the end. But where do we go next with this, or otherwise known as my pseudo roadmap for this tool? I was originally inspired to build this because AWS provides a ton of MCP servers for interacting with their platform, obviously, but even some things that are not necessarily for just working with AWS. Like one of them is an MCP server that can generate mermaid diagrams, and technically could generate mermaid diagrams for anything, but of course is kind of intended to be used to diagram your AWS infrastructure stack. But one of their servers is this, but for AWS. It exposes to your AI agent, whatever you're using, the entirety of AWS's documentation so that it can search and find and understand how to do things so that you can accomplish your hopes and dreams with your project. But there's a lot of directions we could take this MCP server that I've put together. I originally started with just focusing on documentation and then immediately kind of went whoop, off to the side when I threw that composer package search tool together, just so that there was a little bit more to show off. But what if we exposed more of the PHP ecosystem to AI agents? Step in that direction, making it to where you can see composer packages and look those up and find the dependencies you need so that you're not having to reinvent every single wheel for your project. Cool. But what if we take things further than that? I mentioned resources are a read-only, kind of just like, hey, here's information that you should know, check it out, component. What if we exposed all of the published PSRs and PERs as static resources, allowing the agent to understand and utilize all of the hard work that has been done by the PHP framework interoperability group? Close enough. What if we also, we could create a tool specifically for allowing the agent to help modernize a legacy code base? Would this probably just be a wrapper around Rector PHP? Sure, but hey, you got to start somewhere. I could even see a future where Laravel Shift could build a MCP server, probably HTTP authenticated, logging into your account, that would allow the agent to, locally. You can already do this today with Docker shifts through the platform, so it's not a huge leap to this. But imagine if you could just talk to your AI agent and go, "Hey, this thing's still running Laravel 9. Go ahead and shift it to Laravel 10," and it just does the thing that going to laravelshift.com and clicking all the UI buttons also does for you and opening the PR. Just do it all locally on your machine. And now your application's up to date and everything was going to work perfectly out of the box because we all write very well tested applications and can just guarantee it's all good to go post upgrade. Just maybe be careful with setting those tools to auto approve because you don't want an agent to get stuck in a loop and just constantly charging you for shifts over and over and over again. Jason McCreary might like that, but your bank account may not be as happy. And thankfully, Jason's cool and would probably, throw you a bone and not tell you you're out of luck. Sucks. There's a few other. Okay, there we go. There's a few other SDK features that. Okay, that's just all over the place. How do I get all the way back up here? Down, 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 down. Nope, nope. Also no. There. There's, like 2 other SDK features that didn't really fit for what we built live, of course, in real time today. But the 2 main things of those are session management and discovery caching. The second one, discovery caching, is relatively straightforward. Obviously, for the one that we built, we've got 2 tools that are being auto-discovered, so really not slowing the server down on boot up. But if you're building an MCP server for exposing, your platform or a service to an AI agent, you're probably going to have more than 2, and you don't want that server to be slow booting up because, no one likes that. Better to have no internet than slow internet kind of thing. So you could set up discovery caching thanks to PSR16, a resource we could expose by this very server. You can use any caching layer for both the session storage and the discovery caching layer. And that's, by default, it's going to be in memory. It supports using the file system. And then really, if there's a PSR16 adapter for it, you can use it. Redis, MySQL, MS SQL if you're a masochist. Same with Oracle SQL. If it's there, you can use it. Wanted to show off a few resources from the official docs and community. You could find the PHP SDK source code on GitHub at github.com on the context protocol /PHP-SDK. This SDK is still effectively an experimental phase. So things could still change from what I've built and shown off today. to what the final like version 1.0 of this SDK looks like. But if you're really, really wanting to use this, but are a little iffy on the experimental phase, especially because it's understandable if you don't want to throw experimental packages into your production workload. There's tons of issues pre-filed on the repo to give you a start of basically figuring out how can I help develop the SDK to reach its final, well, not final, but full version 1.0 and move out of that experimental stage. And then if you want to learn more about the MCP protocol or specification itself, modelcontextprotocol.io. It's got everything there. If you want to get really into the weeds and see like what the actual like JSON RPC communication layer back and forth is, it's got it. Everything that we talked about today and a lot more, including those things that I mentioned like elicitations, all documented there. I mentioned it earlier, but I do want to give a huge shout out to the PHP Foundation and the Symfony project. This official SDK wouldn't exist without their joint effort. This was actually started via Symfony's AI initiative and the work of, I apologize in advance if I butcher him, but I believe the pronunciation is Kirian Obekwelu. Hopefully, if I butchered it, I apologize. But they walked so that the official SDK could run. Perfect timing, TV. When it comes back, you'll see that we've more or less reached the end of the show. And I want to say thank you. You've got all the tools. Now go build your own master control program. And remember, this one actually is going to fight for the users, unlike the real one in the movie. I've been Hunter Skrasik. You've been a wonderful captive audience. Thank you. And are there any questions?
So since you had Hero flashing up on screen multiple times, Logan was asking, how you like it and have you played with the Google one?
I have anti-gravity installed, but I've not necessarily used it yet. I want to at least give it a try, but I'm also a little bit of an anti-Google person at the moment. So I'll give it a try just so that I know what it's like and if it's something that'd be useful for my coworkers at work, since that's a lot of what I've been doing for the last 6 or so months is basically reviewing and launching POCs for every agentic ID tool that's out there to find what best works for modern ISM services, or more explicitly, Quinn Street, our parent company. So wanting to look at and test all the things so that we can build out a menu for people at work to go, I'm a front-end engineer, and this one is really good for me to use, versus mandating one tool for every type of development, because that's lame. As for Kiro, love it. Huge fan of it. It's the most recent POC that I've kicked off at work in partnership with AWS, and I've been using it personally as well. I did generate what they call the steering documents for this project, which are basically just, markdown files to give the agent more context of what you're working on, like tech stack, what the product is, and I forget the third one. Excuse me. But I didn't use Kiro to actually build this because, I do sometimes like to still write code myself and have fun with it, especially when I want to play around and try the new pipe operator. But I really like Kiro. If you're looking for one to try, it would be it's my current front runner recommendation. You can accomplish what Kiro does and other tools, specifically the spec mode or spec driven development, but it's built into Kiro. Use it, love it. Takes you through building out the requirements document, written out, how you wish every single person at your business would write Jira tickets, but they never do. And then you use that to then build out what the design or rough design is going to look like. And then finally, it generates a task list to actually implement the thing. And then you just go through that file and go run task. And it'll start implementing the specification for the feature that you worked with it on and write the code. When everybody's happy, you deliver the feature. Huzzah. Any other questions?
That is, it looks like a number of folks that will be presenting. And
One question, you put your server use a package for transport through standard IO. I wanted to do that with HTTP instead of standard IO. Is it just like one line of code to change
The SDK out of the box has the transportations implemented for you. So we'll see how quickly I can go back. Wait. One more. Okay, so bottom line of this, where it's doing server run and I'm passing in the new standard IO transport, in the same MCP server transport namespace is an HTTP transport object. So if you're building an HTTP server that is just like, it's not one that requires authentication, you know, like you don't need to be authenticated to talk to PHP's documentation, then yeah, it's just this one line change effectively and you're good to go. If you're building an MCP server that wraps a service where there's, you know, concept of users and authentication and login and that context being what controls what the tools spit out to the agent, it's a little bit more involved, but it has the components there to build out the HTTP protocol with the authentication, whatever layer that is. If you're just doing like API key type authentication, then you're probably fine with just standard HTTP or streamable HTTP transport. But if you're, you know, say using Atlassian and Jira as an example, that tool uses OAuth to authenticate the MCP server. That it has all the pieces in the SDK to like hook up the OAuth piece, but much like in general with OAuth, the second it gets involved, things get a little bit more complicated.
If you wanted to implement the version with an authentication, would you do it with their SDK or would you use a separate like proxy that would handle the authentication and then just pass through the request, non-authenticated request to your server, or would you use two separate tools, or would you use their tool?
You could still use the the MCP SDK. Yeah.
Can you summarize the question for the stream?
Oh, right. Sorry. The question that was asked was, in this case, we're using standard IO transport, and the question was how easy or what's the like level of effort involved to move from standard IO to HTTP. And yeah, for non-authenticated, it's effectively just a one-line change. If you're doing an authenticated service, that's, you know, we're gonna just assume it's an OAuth service. Like you probably already have an OAuth 2 server that it can connect to, and the SDK has the like OAuth 2 client that you can configure with all the details of your authentication server, so that excuse me, whenever I'll use the Atlassian one as an example since that's the one I'm most familiar with that uses the OAuth workflow. When I launch Kira on my work machine, it loads the MCP servers I've configured. And when it loads the Atlassian one, if my session has expired or it's a new session, it pops open the browser window to Atlassian's login just for like any other OAuth application. And then it shows you the typical like, hey, this tool, Atlassian's MCP server, wants to use this information from your account. Is that cool or not? Yes. And then it becomes authenticated and will stay authenticated until that session expires. So you shouldn't need like all the pieces to connect to the OAuth server are already provided with the SDK. Fairly certain they're already there. If not, they are definitely planned for it. I can't remember the to-do list from the SDK's README off the top of my head, but it's all intended to be bundled within this composer package. And then there are other composer packages that already are using the official SDK one. There's a Symfony bundle package that already exists, so you can just auto magically wire that into your Symfony project, and then you just gotta write this line of code and obviously the tools themselves. So basic HTTP, one line change. OAuth gets involved. It'll be a little bit more involved and complicated. But then, and that's where the features that I mentioned, the like session management will come into play, because if you just rely on in memory, for example, then whenever the server shuts off, there goes the authenticated session. And maybe that's fine. You know, not everything needs to have a session cookied, for lack of a better term. But you could also have the MCP server store like an encrypted file on the system or anything else that's available through PSR 16, so that the user is not having to re-authenticate every single time the server boots, only when that authentication session expires. Any other questions, either online or from the lovely folks here in person? Going once? Then, if you're wondering where in the world Carmen Sandiego, Hunter Stracek is, where you can find me, I am on our PHPC social instance for Mastodon, no longer on my own self-hosted because that was a lot of work and I never updated the damn server. So, and then I got so far behind, it was never gonna happen. So I just moved to a server that already existed. And I kind of technically helped set up at the beginning. Feels weird saying, but I did. So now I'll be more involved with helping out. So Ian's not the only one doing the administration for Masto. GitHub.com/hgracek is where you can find me when the TV screen comes back again, unless you're online, in which case nothing is happening for you. And coincidentally, just put like another /PHP-MCP in like 5 to 10 minutes, and all the code of what I wrote will be there available as well. As soon as I push that code up to GitHub, Ian will also share out a link through chat and all the other fun places. But thanks, everybody.
Just like remotely administrating things. Thanks to everybody who is attending either in person or online or in person in another location. Shout out to folks who have gotten kicked out of the Beaverton, Oregon library for being there too late. And just kind of bringing things back to being an in-person community, a distributed in-person community for PHP. We'll be here at this time of day next month for the talk on domain-driven PHP, and continuing same bat time, same bat channel in the future. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.